Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Michael, and this is how I realized I'd rather be alone than married to someone who was ashamed of me as her husband. After being married for over a decade, Catherine had become increasingly distant and avoided any kind of intimacy with me. What had once been a warm, affectionate relationship had gradually turned cold and mechanical. She'd moved from sleeping close to me to staying on her side of the bed, then eventually to going to bed at completely different times, so we wouldn't even share those quiet moments before sleep. Catherine would find reasons to busy herself with work emails or household tasks, whenever we had opportunities to just be together as a couple. Physical intimacy had become almost non-existent. Her excuses range from being tired from work, stressed about projects, dealing with headaches, or simply not in the mood. What had once been a natural and loving part of our relationship had turned into something that felt like a chore for her, something to be avoided whenever possible. The only time Catherine showed any warmth toward me was when there were responsibilities to handle that were beyond her capabilities. She'd likely appreciate my help when I easily handled the situation. But as soon as the crisis was resolved or the task was completed, Catherine would go back to treating me like a roommate she barely tolerated. It was almost like she wanted to be married when it was convenient for her, but wanted to act unmarried when it came to the emotional and physical aspects of our relationship. She wanted all the benefits of having a husband, but she didn't want to actually be a wife to me. Marriage, for Catherine, had become a practical arrangement rather than a romantic partnership. At first, I made excuses for Catherine's behavior and tried to rationalize the changes in our relationship. She'd been promoted to operations director at her company and was working longer hours managing a larger team. She was dealing with increased stress from bigger projects and more complex responsibilities. It was easy for me to assume that she was just tired and overwhelmed with adult responsibilities. I convinced myself that all marriages went through phases where couples were less romantic and affectionate. The honeymoon period had to end eventually, and maybe this was just the natural evolution of a long-term relationship. I figured once Catherine got settled into her new role and felt more confident about her responsibilities, our personal life would improve again. But over time, it became clear that Catherine wasn't just going through a temporary phase. She was actively normalizing a pattern of disrespecting me and treating our marriage like an inconvenience rather than a partnership. The coldness and distance weren't temporary adjustments to life stress. They had become her new normal way of relating to me. What had started as occasional moodiness or distraction had evolved into a consistent pattern of dismissive behavior. She'd interrupt me when I was talking, ignore my questions, and act annoyed when I tried to engage her in conversation about anything beyond basic household logistics. Whenever I would ask Catherine what was wrong, or if there was something we needed to discuss about our relationship, she would dismiss my concerns completely. She'd say nothing was wrong with our marriage and either ignore whatever thing I say next or just walk out. According to Catherine, I was being too sensitive and expecting unrealistic levels of attention from a busy, successful woman. She'd accuse me of being needy or clingy when I'd try to initiate conversations about our lack of intimacy or emotional connection. Catherine would say that mature marriages weren't supposed to be about constant romance, and that I needed to accept that we weren't college kids anymore who could spend all our time focusing on each other. But her actions told a completely different story from her words. While Catherine claimed everything was fine between us, she continued to avoid intimacy, reject my attempts at affection, and treat me with increasing coldness and irritation. The disconnect between what she said and how she actually behaved made me feel like I was losing my mind. The criticism had become constant and covered almost every aspect of my life and behavior. Catherine would find fault with everything. It became impossible to do anything right in her eyes. She'd criticize my clothes, my haircut, my choice of restaurants when we went out, my opinions about everything, and even my relationship with my own family. Catherine had become hypercritical about everything I did, and I found myself walking on eggshells trying to avoid her disapproval and negative comments. But as I paid more attention to Catherine's recent patterns of nagging and criticism, I began to notice one particular complaint that came up repeatedly in her rants. Over the years, Catherine had been promoted several times at her company, and now significantly out-earned me. Her salary as operations director was almost double what I made as a regional sales manager. Catherine had started to look at me as less than her equal, and would compare me unfavorably to other men she considered more successful or worthy of her attention. She'd make comments about colleagues who drove better cars, lived in bigger houses, or took more expensive vacations than we could afford on our combined income. The breaking point came one evening when I'd left some dishes in the sink after dinner instead of washing them immediately. Catherine came into the kitchen and saw the unwashed plates and glasses, and she completely lost it. She started yelling about my laziness and lack of consideration for her time and effort. But then her rant took a more personal and hurtful turn. Catherine told me that I wasn't in her class professionally or financially, and that I should be grateful she was still with me despite my obvious shortcomings. She said most women at her level wouldn't settle for someone who made as little money as I did, or who was as unmotivated about career advancement as she perceived me to be. Hearing Catherine say that I wasn't in her class and should be happy she was still with me completely bruised my ego and self-respect. The woman I'd been married to for 12 years was essentially telling me that she was doing me a favor by staying married to me, and that I didn't deserve someone of her caliber. But I held myself back from responding or attacking her in return. I didn't want to escalate the argument or say things I couldn't take back, even though her words had cut deeply. I just stood there quietly while she finished her rant, then walked away without defending myself or trying to argue with her assessment of our relationship. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Catherine, who was sleeping peacefully as if nothing had happened, while my mind raced with thoughts about our marriage and my self-worth. The only thing I could think about was how to improve my life and career so that Catherine would respect me like she once had. I tried to come up with ideas for advancing my career, increasing my income, or somehow becoming the kind of man Catherine seemed to think she deserved. But I couldn't come up with any realistic plans beyond continuing to work hard and hoping for better opportunities. The gulf between her expectations and my current reality felt impossible to bridge. In the week that followed Catherine's brutal assessment of my worth, I decided to devote more time and energy to my work instead of focusing on trying to please her or prevent her from nagging me. I started staying later at the office, taking on additional projects, and networking more aggressively with potential clients and industry contacts. Instead of coming home and asking Catherine what I could do to help around the house or what we needed to discuss about our relationship, I focused on building my career and trying to prove my professional value. I figured if I could increase my income and advance my position, maybe Catherine would start treating me with more respect. Despite my increased focus on work and my efforts to avoid being home as much as I used to, things didn't improve between Catherine and me as the months went by. If anything, our relationship continued to deteriorate even though I wasn't around as much to trigger her complaints about my domestic shortcomings. Catherine seemed to interpret my increased work hours and decreased availability as further evidence of my inadequacy rather than as an effort to improve myself professionally. She'd make sarcastic comments about me finally trying to build a real career, but would also complain that I was never home to help with household responsibilities. As more months passed, Catherine became even more vicious with her replies to my attempts at conversation and increasingly harsh with her words, even when we were in public settings with friends or family. She'd make cutting remarks about my job, my income, or my general competence in front of other people, apparently not caring how her comments affected my reputation or self-esteem. She would joke about my career limitations or make unfavorable comparisons between me and other men who were more successful or ambitious. These public humiliations were particularly painful because they showed that Catherine's disrespect for me wasn't limited to our private interactions. But despite Catherine's increasingly harsh treatment, I kept trying to maintain some level of affection and connection in our marriage. I'd still compliment her appearance when she dressed up for work events, and try to show small gestures of love and appreciation that had once been natural parts of our relationship. Catherine would consistently undermine these efforts at affection and connection. If I complimented her outfit, she'd make a sarcastic comment about my fashion sense. Every gesture of love was met with dismissal or criticism. After a couple of months of my doing my best to improve our relationship, while Catherine continued to treat me with disdain, we received an invitation to attend the 25th wedding anniversary celebration of our friends. They were having a party to celebrate their milestone anniversary with family and friends. When I told Catherine about the invitation, she immediately said she was too busy with work projects to attend and wouldn't be able to honor the invitation. She claimed she had work presentations to prepare and couldn't spare an entire evening for a social event, even for friends we'd known for years. I tried to convince Catherine that we should attend together, explaining that they were good friends who had always supported our relationship and that it would mean a lot to them if we were there to celebrate their anniversary. After some discussion and gentle pressure from me, Catherine reluctantly agreed to attend the party. On the day of the anniversary party, I dressed in my best suit and took extra care with my appearance because I wanted to look good for Catherine and show her that I could present myself well in social situations. Catherine also dressed elegantly, choosing a dress that brought out her curves, and she looked stunning in it. Before we left the house, I looked at Catherine and told her how breathtaking she looked and how proud I was to be attending the party with her. I genuinely meant the compliments and hoped that the evening might be an opportunity for us to reconnect in some way. But Catherine undermined my compliments as usual, making a dismissive comment about how I was laying it on thick and acting like she'd made some extraordinary effort just to look presentable for a social event. She seemed annoyed that I'd commented on her appearance at all. I smiled to cover up. When we arrived at the anniversary party, everything seemed to be going smoothly. The venue was nicely decorated, there was good food and music, and the celebrants seemed genuinely happy to see us there. We congratulated them on their 25 years together and joined the other guests in celebrating their successful marriage. For the first hour or so of the party, Catherine kept up the appearance of being a happy, loving wife as we talked to other mutual friends and acquaintances at the event. She'd smile when people asked about our family, make pleasant conversation about our jobs and activities, and generally act like we had a normal, healthy relationship. This performance of marital happiness was something Catherine had become skilled at over the years. In public settings, she could convincingly play the role of a satisfied wife when she wanted to, even though her private behavior toward me was consistently cold and disrespectful. She understood the social expectations and could meet them when necessary. While having a pleasant conversation with some mutual friends, I instinctively reached for Catherine's hand as a natural gesture of affection and connection. This was the kind of casual, unconscious display of love that had once been normal for us. But Catherine immediately pulled her hand away from mine with obvious irritation, as if my touch was unwelcome and inappropriate. Instead of quietly withdrawing her hand or finding a subtle way to avoid the contact, she made a rejection of my affection very clear and visible to the people around us by saying, "Don't let them think we're a couple." Her voice carried more than she probably intended, and several other friends nearby also turned to look at us with confused expressions. The words hit me like a physical blow. After 12 years of marriage, Catherine was so ashamed of being seen as my wife that she couldn't even tolerate the appearance of being a couple in front of our friends. She would rather publicly humiliate me than allow people to think we had a loving relationship. Feeling completely humiliated and having reached my absolute breaking point after months of tolerating Catherine's coldness and disrespect, I stood up calmly from where we'd been sitting. For me, after tolerating her emotional withdrawal, her constant criticism, her public humiliation, and her general disrespect for months, this blatant denial of our marriage in front of our friends cut too deep for me to ignore or rationalize away. I looked directly at Catherine and said in a calm but clear voice, "From this moment, we are not." Then I walked away from the conversation and left the anniversary party without making a scene or causing additional drama. Some people watched me leave with confused expressions, but I was done with Catherine's treatment of me and our marriage. I drove home alone, leaving Catherine at the party without a ride, though I knew she could call a taxi or ask one of our friends for transportation. I wasn't concerned about how she would get home. I was focused on the fact that our marriage had just ended with her public declaration that she didn't want to be seen as my wife. Catherine arrived home several hours after I did, and she was absolutely furious that I had embarrassed her and abandoned her at the anniversary party. She claimed that my reaction was exactly why she had refused to attend in the first place, and that I had proven her point about being an embarrassment to her in social situations. She accused me of overreacting and making a scene. According to Catherine, I had misinterpreted her words and responded in a way that was childish and inappropriate for the setting. But I didn't respond to Catherine's anger or attempt to defend my actions. I had already made up my mind about what I needed to do, and her attempts to blame me for the evening's events only confirmed that I was making the right decision. There was no point in arguing with someone who couldn't see how hurtful her behavior had been. Seeing that she couldn't get any reaction out of me despite her angry accusations and complaints about my behavior at the party, Catherine eventually gave up trying to engage me in an argument. She went to clean up and prepare for bed that night, apparently assuming that things would return to normal by the next day. But I spent that night making concrete plans for ending our marriage. I made a Google search for divorce attorneys in our area, reading reviews and checking credentials for lawyers who specialized in divorce cases. I found several options and noted their contact information and office hours. The next morning, I went for my usual morning run to clear my head and think about the decision I was making. When I came home, I showered, dressed in business attire, and drove directly to the office of a divorce attorney whose practice was highly rated and who had availability for an 8 a.m. consultation. At the lawyer's office, I explained my situation clearly and directly. I didn't want to waste time on counseling, mediation, or attempts at reconciliation. I wanted the marriage to end as quickly and efficiently as possible. I had reached my limit with Catherine's disrespect and public humiliation, and I knew there was no path back to a healthy relationship. The lawyer explained the divorce process, the timeline for getting papers prepared and filed, and the likely outcomes given our financial situation and the fact that we had no children together. He was professional and straightforward about what I could expect from the legal proceedings. In the weeks before the divorce papers were ready to be served, I became like a ghost in my own house. I stopped greeting Catherine when I came home from work, didn't respond to her attempts at conversation, and avoided any interaction that wasn't absolutely necessary for practical household matters. I stopped asking about her day, commenting on her appearance, or making any effort to maintain the pretense of a normal marriage. Catherine seemed puzzled by my behavior at first, but she didn't ask what was wrong or try to address the obvious change in our relationship dynamic. This period of silence and emotional withdrawal was actually peaceful for me because I was no longer trying to please someone who had made it clear that she didn't respect or value me. I was mentally and emotionally preparing for my new life without Catherine while waiting for the legal process to begin. Once the divorce papers were ready, I gave them to Catherine one evening when she came home from work. I simply handed her the envelope without any explanation. She opened it, read the documents, and looked at me with what seemed like genuine shock that I had actually followed through on ending our marriage. The only thing Catherine asked when she saw the divorce papers was, "Is this what you want?" I didn't even bother to answer her question. My actions had already made my intentions clear, and there was nothing left to discuss. Her public denial of our relationship had been the final straw, and no amount of conversation could repair the damage she had done. The divorce process was relatively uneventful compared to what I had expected. My lawyer encouraged me to ask for a financial settlement since Catherine earned considerably more than I did, and we had built up joint assets during our marriage. I was reluctant to ask for anything from Catherine, but I followed my attorney's advice and pursued a reasonable settlement. By the time the divorce was finalized and our assets were divided several months later, I received compensation that helped me establish my new independent life. The settlement included a portion of our home's equity, half of our joint savings, and some spousal support for a limited period while I adjusted to single life. Catherine was clearly not happy with the financial terms of our divorce settlement, particularly having to pay me spousal support when she had always seen herself as the more successful and valuable partner in our marriage. But frankly, I didn't care about her feelings regarding the settlement. She had brought this situation on herself through her behavior. After the divorce was finalized, I moved on with my life, focusing on healing from the emotional wounds of our failed marriage, while knowing that I was better off alone than with someone who saw me as less than worthy of her respect and affection. I found a smaller apartment that I could afford on my own and began rebuilding my social life and self-esteem. The process of healing took time and therapy, but I gradually began to feel more confident and self-assured without Catherine's constant criticism and emotional withdrawal. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with during the worst periods of our marriage and started pursuing interests and activities that I had always dismissed as unimportant. 3 years after the conclusion of our divorce, Catherine sent me a text message one night. It attempted to sound casual and friendly, but I wasn't fooled by her sudden interest in reconnecting. The message asked how I was doing and mentioned that she'd been thinking about our time together and was wondering how my life was going. I didn't respond to Catherine's initial attempts at friendly conversation because I suspected she had an ulterior motive for contacting me after about 3 years of no communication. When she sent a follow-up message a few days later, I decided to cut through the pleasantries and ask her directly what she wanted. Catherine asked if we could meet in person to talk, claiming that she had some things she wanted to say to me that couldn't be communicated effectively through text messages. Against my better judgment, and despite my instinct that this meeting would be a waste of time, I agreed to see her one more time. A few days later, Catherine came to my apartment and we sat down to talk for what I assumed would be a brief and pointless conversation. But Catherine had apparently prepared a lengthy speech about our marriage and her regrets about how things had ended between us. She apologized extensively for how she had treated me during the final years of our marriage, acknowledging that she had been wrong to disrespect me and take me for granted. Catherine admitted that I had been the best husband any woman could have, and that she had realized this after being in several unsuccessful relationships since our divorce. Catherine said that her subsequent dating experiences had shown her how rare it was to find a man who was loyal, dependable, and genuinely committed to making a marriage work. She talked about how she had come to understand that financial success and career achievement weren't the most important qualities in a partner, and that she had been foolish to prioritize those things over the love and devotion I had offered her throughout our marriage. Catherine also admitted that her behavior at the anniversary party had been cruel and unnecessary, and that she regretted the way she had publicly humiliated me in front of our friends. She said she understood now that her words had been the final blow to a marriage that she had already damaged through months of disrespectful treatment. I allowed Catherine to talk for as long as she wanted without interrupting her or arguing with anything she said. I listened to her entire apology and confession of regret without offering any comments or reactions that might influence what she was telling me. A part of me was curious to hear her perspective on our marriage and divorce, and part of me felt like she deserved the opportunity to say whatever she felt she needed to say. I had no intention of getting back together with her, but I could afford to spend an hour listening to her attempt at making amends. After Catherine finished apologizing for her past behavior and expressing her regrets about how our marriage had ended, she clarified that she wasn't asking me to remarry her or even to consider rebuilding our romantic relationship. Instead, she said she wanted me in her life, in some capacity, as a friend, confidant, or emotional support person. Catherine said she missed having me available to talk to about her problems and challenges, and that she had come to appreciate the stability and reliability I had provided during our marriage. She wanted to maintain some kind of ongoing connection without the complications of a romantic relationship. I thanked Catherine for taking the time to apologize and for sharing her perspective on our marriage and its aftermath. I acknowledged that it probably wasn't easy for her to admit that she had been wrong about how she had treated me, and I appreciated her willingness to take responsibility for her actions. But I told Catherine clearly and definitively that there was no possibility of me being in her life, in any capacity, going forward. I explained that she used to be my world, the most important person in my life, and the center of my emotional universe. I had loved her completely and unconditionally for 12 years. However, sitting there listening to her apologize and express regret, I realized that she no longer meant anything to me emotionally. The love I had once felt for her had been completely extinguished by her treatment of me and the way our marriage had ended. She had become a stranger whose opinion and feelings were irrelevant to my life and happiness. I told Catherine that her apology was too little and too late to repair the damage she had done to my feelings for her. While I forgave her for my own peace of mind, forgiveness didn't mean I wanted any kind of ongoing relationship with someone who had shown me such fundamental disrespect. I asked Catherine to please never contact me again, explaining that moving forward meant leaving the past completely behind. I had built a new life without her, and I had no interest in allowing her back into my world in any capacity, regardless of how much she might regret her previous choices. The conversation ended with Catherine leaving my apartment, disappointed but understanding that I was serious about maintaining no contact. She had apparently hoped that her apology would open the door to some kind of friendship or ongoing connection, but I had made it clear that the ship had sailed permanently. Looking back on that final conversation with Catherine, I felt satisfied with how I'd handled her attempt to get back into my life. I had maintained my boundaries and refused to let someone back in who had spent years showing me I wasn't good enough for them. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. Catherine's surprise visit confirmed what I already knew. Ending our marriage had been the right choice. I was living peacefully, without the constant criticism and emotional games that had defined our final years together. Being alone was infinitely better than being with someone who saw me as a consolation prize. What I learned from 12 years with Catherine was simple. You can't love someone into respecting you. Either they see your value or they don't. Catherine had made her feelings clear long before that anniversary party, and I should have listened sooner. Catherine taught me an expensive but valuable lesson about self-worth. Sometimes, the people who claim to love you are the ones doing the most damage to your confidence and happiness. Recognizing that and walking away takes courage, but it's the only way to find something better.